patients with cementless implants simply have better outcomes and in many cases see better implant survivorship as well. That's what you see in the literature, and that's what you see when you speak to patients as well. The real winners in the orthopedics market will be the companies who can best integrate new technologies, new products and startups into their portfolio. So the challenge, I think, is how do you find the right application for a technology that genuinely benefits patients whilst also benefiting all of the other partners in the space. So the ability to build a relationship, the ability to prove that you can meet your goals, prove that you can stay on time, prove that you can attract the right talent, the ability to build a company where you really get this kind of unwavering view that this is going to happen anyway. When you see a startup that repeatedly meets its objectives, that's a really, really exciting place to be.
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech Podcast, where I speak with industry leaders shaping the future of medtech. I'm Damian Medarski, and today I'm joined by Max Munford, founder and CEO of OSSTEC, a company at the forefront of next-generation orthopedic implants. Beyond building OSSTEC, he's been developing a strong voice around how orthopedic innovation actually works, covering everything from startup-driven pipelines and capital allocation to the evolving role of surgeon influence in adoption. It's a perspective that sits right at the intersection of technology, clinical reality, and commercial strategy. And I hope we can explore some of that today. Max, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Dami. It's great to be here, and I'm excited about the conversation.
Nice one. I appreciate that. So you've gone from a PhD in additive manufacturing to founding OSSTEC. What was the specific moment where this shifted from research into a real company?
Yeah, I think in my mind, it was actually always the other way around. So I'd say there was never a particular moment where I suddenly switched out of research, but rather the reason I did the research to begin with was so that we could build a company, build a technology, build products, work with great surgeons, and actually build something that could benefit patients. I think going into the research, I was always very aware of the impact of what the technology could be and where it could go. And it was kind of the right person at the right place at the right time. The technology was in a status where you could see that maybe 2, 3, 4 years on, it would be ready to take into a commercial setting and start sharing with surgeons. And that's what got me excited about the technology. I think I could see that the technology was directly relevant to addressing problems that patients were seeing in a very real way. And so I actually was looking for PhD opportunities that could lead into industry, and that's what I found.
Amazing. And what problem in orthopedics did you feel was fundamentally unsolved or misunderstood at the time?
So I think there are multiple. There's a technology answer and there's a product answer. So the technology answer there for me is all around eliminating the use of cement, eliminating the issues that cement can lead to, and improving implant fixation. We know from various studies here in the UK, Europe, and more globally as well, that patients with cementless implants simply have better outcomes and in many cases see better implant survivorship as well. So I got really excited about this idea of using next generation technologies, using 3D printing to improve fixation so that implants could last longer. And I think that's what you see in the literature, and that's what you see when you speak to patients as well.
And talking about your foundation experience and the early stages and everything that you have learned maybe, what are the biggest misconceptions founders have when entering orthopedics from an engineering background?
I think coming from a PhD and that background, it's very easy to, although I think the technology is obviously at the core of everything that has to happen in orthopedics, and everything that is at the core of starting a company and especially a startup. The technology is in many ways the thing that is the foundation and underpins everything else. But I think it's actually very hard for engineers and for technically minded people to start thinking in what I would term as a product mindset and start appreciating movements in the market and start appreciating this idea that surgeons and surgeon workflows trump everything. And I think you can call that a number of things. It's got many different names, whether that's usability or surgeon workflows or operating room efficiency. These are the key trends and key drivers that I think really drive adoption of new products. So the challenge, I think, is how do you find the right application for a technology that genuinely benefits patients whilst also benefiting all of the other partners in the space. So CMOs, surgeons, hospitals, patients, distributors. I think you need to find an application of your technology that benefits all of these partners. And that's what I think we found at OSSTEC.
And if I can make an analogy here in terms of the focus itself, it's almost like your product is a baby, but you don't only focus on obviously raising the baby, but the outside world as well, and how that influences the development as well. I think it's a very useful way of looking into things, is that there is a world outside of the product development. And if you're focusing only on product development up to a certain stage, then you miss on a lot of things that should have happened earlier, and you're delaying the development of the company, I would assume, later on as well.
Yeah. And I mean, there's an interesting phenomenon in orthopedics, which presents a challenge and also a very profound opportunity. And I think that's all to do with how the market is made up and constructed, and the number of players in the market, and specifically the number of players who own such a large percentage of the market. I think for that reason, partnering at an early stage is really valuable in orthopedics as a startup. But also as a startup, it's your job to navigate and build a strategy that enables you to be independent, that enables you to build secondary and tertiary partnerships with your users, with your manufacturers, with third-party distributors, whoever it is, with your investors. Really important driver of startups, of course. So I think partnerships in orthopedics are really important, perhaps more so than other areas of medtech. And I think lots of startups often undervalue understanding what is important to your prospective partners and what it is they're looking for, where their portfolio gaps are, and how you can actually fit in their portfolio or fit alongside them to add value in the future. So for me, the challenge of building a startup and building a clear vision for a startup in orthopedics is all around how do you take, yes, a really impressive technology, how do you build a wildly credible team around that? How do you engage all the different partners along the way? But also ultimately really to understand what product market fit is and how you bridge from technology and team all the way through to a product that all of the partners in the space value from and see value from it.
Amazing. And talking about the amazing technology, at a high level, what makes your implant fundamentally different from what's currently used?
Yeah, so I mean, my PhD and the background research was at Imperial College London. It's a leading university globally. And during about 10 years of research there, we were really able to characterize and understand in a subtly different way to what other people have done elsewhere, how you can 3D print metals to mimic bone, to improve your cementless bone interface surface to improve fixation, whilst also actually 3D printing the bone and cartilage articulating surface. So that's something that we're doing in a way which is unique compared to other people. And that technology is applicable across the whole body, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. We believe that our platform technology is applicable across the whole field of orthopedics.
And what's the biological mechanism you're leveraging, and how does it compare to existing applications?
Yeah, so I think with implant fixation, you need a cascade of multiple mechanisms. Of course, you have initial fixation mechanisms that come from a press fit. And I think that's really important because that's the surgeon's initial feedback from how the implant is sat. So again, working with partners, really important there to understanding that. But also long term, we've been able to characterize all aspects of 3D printed porous metals and show that we can get superior long-term biological ingrowth compared to other devices.
Which failure modes are you specifically targeting?
So a really key failure mode currently, one of the leading failure modes in knee surgery is aseptic loosening, and that's what we're addressing. And we've seen really great data so far in animal studies, in the lab, and in cadaver studies as well.
And what improvement should that deliver in practice?
My vision for OSSTEC is that we are able to develop our technology, prove it in our first product, and then expand out from there to multiple applications. And we're actually already working on some of those. I'd like to see implants lasting longer. I'd like to see more implants be cementless. And I'd like to see all of that technology coupled with a surgical workflow in a product package that enables surgeons to work in a more streamlined manner, which I think would be hugely beneficial both here in the UK and the US and Europe and globally.
Yeah. And I'm very much aware of the cement shortages that NHS has experienced in the last couple of months in particular, and I'm assuming that's only reiterating your goal of developing these cementless implants longer term.
Definitely. I think, we hear a lot about operating efficiency in orthopedics and how important that is. And you hear lots of surgeons wanting to operate and run their clinics and run their operating rooms in a more efficient way. And I think I completely support that. And efficient surgery has multiple meanings depending on who you're speaking to. So, one interpretation of that is absolutely to have a streamlined surgical workflow. But I think we often overlook the use of consumables, the use of extra machinery in the operating room, the use of infrastructure. If I look at patients and I speak to hundreds of surgeons, what they tell me they want is to keep patients more active, to treat them earlier, because we know that that's better from a whole number of perspectives, and also to be able to treat patients the same day, so outpatient care. So 3 key drivers that I see in orthopedics are keeping patients active, treating patients earlier, and treating patients in the same day in the outpatient setting. So to that extent, our technology, whilst also having the clinical benefits, whilst also having surgical benefits, I think there are real operating benefits as well that are really beneficial, because we can enable more surgeries to be performed sooner and the same day.
And talking about clinical benefits, how are you approaching clinical validation at this stage?
So we're a company based in the UK, here in London, and we have a surgeon team that straddles the UK and the US as well. So we will be launching in the US. The regulatory environment there opens certain doors for us and presents opportunities for us to launch in the US, which of course is the largest market for what we're doing. But actually, our if you look at the UK, there's a really strong heritage for orthopedic innovation here in the UK, and especially being here at Imperial, and with the surgeon network that we have here, there are also some really exciting opportunities to perform clinical trials here in the UK to generate clinical evidence that way. So we've got a 2-pronged approach.
And additive manufacturing has been around for a while. Why is it now becoming commercially viable?
Yeah, you've got to look at the opportunity as surgeons see it. So I think surgeons are now coming and looking at OSSTEC from a point of view of, they understand 3D printing. They've seen some benefits previously of people kind of scratching the surface of 3D printing, and they want more of that. And I think people understand more so than ever before what the benefits of moving to cementless surgery actually are. And if I kind of look at that from more of a top level in terms of what we're doing at OSSTEC, I think being able to 3D print the articulating surface is also new, and that opens up benefits and exciting aspects, not just clinically, not just technically, but also on the supply chain side as well. So I think I think we'll see, and it's documented well in the space in various publications. I think we'll see an even further growth of not just cementless technology, but the move to 3D printing as cost and scalability come down there as well.
And you're very passionate, and in introduction I've mentioned obviously the fact that you're advocating for hearing the voice of the customer as well. How do surgeons actually adopt new technologies in reality versus how companies think they do?
Yeah, I think this really works into, you have different stages of adopters, and I think different companies will rightly target different profiles of surgeon, different profiles of user, and that really affects your adoption strategy and what you're looking for in terms of what does good adoption mean and what does good adoption look like to you. One thing that I wanted to do is to understand these different kind of phenotypes of surgeons as best I could. Yeah. So we spent a lot of time researching, well, what makes a key opinion leader, a KOL? What makes a key opinion leader surgeon? How good of a key opinion leader? And it's often, I think people have broadly perhaps misunderstood that historically. You often hear people talk about key opinion leaders as people who do lots of surgeries, and the more surgeries you do, the better key opinion leader you are. But that's actually not what I found. So we undertook a piece of work where I looked at a huge data set going back like 10 years, where we looked at the volumes of surgeries that surgeons were performing, their publications in the space, their industry and strategic relationships, their location and foundational training, and other factors as well. And from that, we were able to characterize, well, what actually makes a surgeon a key opinion leader, and what signals them as a key opinion leader in the space. But then also, probably more exciting than that, because we had this kind of temporal element to the data, we were able to characterize how likely a surgeon is to increase their KOL status in the future. So when I talk about good surgeon influence and what makes the right surgeon team. I think you need to understand what profile of surgeon you actually are looking for. So we characterize this into people who are high or low KOL status and high or low growth, 4 phenotypes.
Okay.
And within that, you have your rising stars who are perhaps not yet a KOL status, but we're expecting them to kind of increase and break out into that space in the future. And we also looked at surgeons who are legacy leaders, perhaps for whatever reason. There are various reasons, and these are still very, very influential people, but they're a more stable place in their career. And then we also looked at people who are these kind of high KOL status and also likely to increase in the future. And I think across the 4 phenotypes that we characterized in my article there are benefits to having members of your surgeon team who represent the whole surgeon spectrum there. So I think I would say you need to understand your adoption strategy. Is it that you're aiming for really deep penetration within a niche selection of surgeons, in which case, someone who is high KOL might be really useful? Or is it that actually your strategy is to convert the masses, in which case it doesn't really matter if someone is growing their KOL status in the future, and that opens a slightly different opportunity. So I think understanding what your adoption strategy actually requires from you and what you need to be successful in the space, that enables you to build a really robust surgical team once you know and understand these different phenotypes and what actually makes a surgeon a KOL.
Yeah. So in your particular KOL strategy, are you engaging more superstars versus rising stars?
Yes. So our plan so far has been to target these superstars. And, again, it comes down, there's no right answer, I think. And my point to emphasize here is that lots of people just go, oh, well, I must have superstars or I must have rising stars. I think it really depends on your strategy and where you want your surgeon strategy to be and where you want it to grow in the next 2 to 5 years, something in that range. So in our case, certainly for launch, surgeons who fit within this superstar category are absolutely what we're targeting. Beyond that, absolutely, there are benefits to proving that you can gain adoption with other profiles of surgeons. So, your surgeon strategy is dynamic. It will change over time. And the profile of surgeons that you need will change over time as well. So what you need at launch may well, in fact, almost definitely won't be the same 2, 5, 10 years later.
So almost being non-linear in terms of the need for that KOL influence on an ongoing basis as your company develops.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word non-linear there. We actually found that these things are not linear. So I mentioned that people historically have said that and assumed that increasing procedure volumes makes you more of a key opinion leader. We actually only found that your procedure volumes account for 40% of your key opinion leader score. And the other 60% is made up of various other characteristics like your publications or engagement at conferences or engagement in design work or educational work was actually a really important piece, or even where you were trained and your current location. There are other factors as well, but it's a very complicated kind of web of data that builds up to how much of a key opinion leader someone is, and your procedure volume is only 40% of that.
Adoption is no doubt very important, but so is product market fit as well. How does real product market fit look like in the operating room from your perspective?
I think it comes down to understanding all the stakeholders. Surgeons are absolutely the most important one, and that's why I think for a company in orthopedics, they have to be a really core part of your strategy. I'm a big believer in engaging partners early and bringing them along the journey. So that's what we do at OSSTEC, and we've got a great team of surgeons, and our partners beyond that who we bring on that journey, and they share every win and they weather the storm with us as well as a startup. Product market fit to me is kind of independent of the technology, and actually lots of founders, lots of engineers start talking about product market fit and they answer it by talking about the technology. I think that's probably not what you should be doing. I think what does product market fit mean? It means, will there be more or less of X in the future? Will there be more or less cementless implants in the future? I think the answer is very clear, and the industry unanimously agrees that there will be more cementless procedures performed in the future. So product market fit to me means, am I working with the key growth drivers in the market? In our case, So cementless implants, operating efficiency. Am I enabling my users and my partners to do more of the things they want to do while reducing pain points? And I think when you really get product market fit right, and when you really understand it, you can demonstrate that you have product market fit and buy-in from your partners and the users in the space before you even get to market. And I think that's when you know that you're onto a winner and you're in a really, really strong position.
You're now at yet another junction in the company development in terms of commercialization, or let's say, I see it as up the hill, down the hill. It's what usually a medtech development or a medtech company development looks like. It's very different from thinking about product development to regulatory process to now commercialization, but also manufacturing as well. How are you thinking about manufacturing and scaling as you move forward through commercialization?
I mean, I think what we've seen in orthopedics is a growth in power of two partners in particular, CMOs and manufacturers at one end, and sort of the distributors and kind of big ortho strategics who essentially run the space as well. So I think if you look at that, you as a startup, you can try and fight that system, or you can work with it. And I actually think that system works very well at the minute. Mm-hmm. Bear in mind that sales channels are I think a huge barrier to adoption, to growth. So those are owned and confined by companies that do an extremely good job of managing sales, managing distribution. Yeah. So what is the role of a startup? I think you have to look at the role of a startup is to contribute to and harness value from both of those partners, whilst also driving a real wedge in terms of finding your place by bringing along cultivating partnerships, cultivating technology, cultivating product market fit, having a real plan and a strategy to prove adoption, and ultimately being the middle person between those two partners, your CMO and whoever owns your distribution. I think a startup can very readily prove adoption, can very readily launch products, but for widespread scaling later on, you will probably need a distribution partner. So what is the role of startups? I think it's to cultivate all of the relationships, not just a technology, to develop R&D and to externalize R&D risk off of the books of these kind of big ortho strategics. And that's what we see in the space. And to also bring along and provide access to CMOs with other partners so that together, all three of the players in that space, CMOs, startups, and strategics, can all bring new innovation to market to benefit patients.
So we both share a common opinion that startups are now the front end of orthopedic innovation. How does that influence how you're building OSSTEC?
If you start from the ground up, so as a startup, it is very hard to do anything without fuel in the tank, without investment, without smart investment, and without support and relationships behind you. So at the base, you have to be able to find a way to, and you have to be able to find an endpoint that and a measure of success that is a success whether you are able to partner with an external party, or if you go independent. And actually, there are benefits to both of those. I talk lots about the strong partnering is in orthopedics, and we've seen, I'd say, a disproportionate number of acquisitions and exits in the orthopedic space compared to elsewhere. I think that is absolutely an exciting opportunity within orthopedics, but you need to also find the right product and the right team that can function independently as a startup, because as a startup or as any company, I think being reliant on another partner is extremely difficult and it exposes you to too much risk. So to me, why are startups important in the orthopedic space? Is because they enable your distribution partners and the big ortho strategics to externalize R&D and for them to not take R&D risk. And there are some other financial benefits there to them as well, whilst also enabling startups to operate independently. And you have to offer those startups a route to, yes, perhaps exit, but also more importantly, function and operate independently as a standalone company. And I think what we'll see in the future looking forwards is that the real winners in the orthopedics market, especially in the big players, will be the companies who can best integrate new technologies, new products and startups into their portfolio, rather than the people who try to build the most products or necessarily buy the most products. The winner is all about integration rather than just buying companies. And how do you partner early to help everyone mitigate risk.
It's a very interesting view, to be honest, and I fully agree with you. And from a strategic perspective, in your opinion, what do strategics actually look for before they seriously engage with a company like yours?
Yeah, I think it depends what you mean by engagement. And I think beyond anything else, relationships and building relationships in the space is really important. I think, and you see this, it's not so different to raising capital for a startup. The highest conviction partners that we have as investors are people that we've built relationships with over a prolonged period of time and who have backed the company multiple times. So I think you see that with other types of relationships that you can build as well as a startup. So what do big orthopedic companies want, or any strategic within medtech? I think the ability to build a relationship, the ability to prove that you can meet your goals, prove that you can stay on time, prove that you can attract the right talent to execute, and really ultimately the ability to build a company where you really get this kind of unwavering view that this is going to happen anyway. It's going to happen. This is going to be a breakout product. Surgeons are waiting to use it. Hospitals are waiting to adopt it. We have garnered all of the IP, technology, all of the relationships you need, the core team that needs to execute this thing. And actually, hey, we spoke to you a year ago and we're still here. We're still doing great things and we're moving at a faster rate than you can internally. So I think those are all the things that people get excited about with startups. When you see a startup that repeatedly meets its objectives, that's a really, really exciting place to be.
I guess earlier in our conversation, you've also mentioned that investors are one of the more important partners in developing a medtech business as well. And I know you are fundraising. So how are you positioning the company from a fundraising perspective in today's environment?
Yeah, I think fundraising as a startup is always hard. And, you hear lots of stories. You hear lots of stories and huge success stories, and I think those are anomalous and far and few between, and actually especially in healthcare and especially in medtech and especially in orthopedics. So I think this game is all about finding the right investor, building relationships, and finding people who you can build credibility with. So and finding people who understand your space or the risk profiles that you're talking about and who are aligned with where the company aims to take risk in a strategic way compared to where there are external risks that we simply can't control and we have to weather. So I think what we've seen in orthopedics is lots of investors moving slightly later stage. Investors who previously may have invested at seed stage are now Series A or even Series B scaling capital. So there's a moving of goalposts there. And I think, I'd say that trend reflects more broadly the startup landscape, much more so than it does actually just the orthopedic space. So I think you need investors who are able to come in earlier, who have a degree of flexibility because plans change. Actually, the only thing that's guaranteed in startup investing is that some plans will evolve. Yeah. So you need investors in the current market who are happy to weather that change. And if their position as an investor is that they only come in, say, once you have sufficient clinical data or for scaling capital, then that's fine. You should still be building those relationships. But you also need obviously other people that can come in prior to that. So I think for us, we have a really strong investor base of people that are bought into the value of the technology, the credibility of the team. We've got an amazing team at OSSTEC, the voice of our adopters and early surgeon team, and ultimately the impact that the product will have on patients as well. I think that's really important because any investors who are purely financially driven are probably likely to be looking elsewhere in the tech space for their gains. So I think all of that is the kind of lens that I view startup fundraising for an orthopedic company through. But again, it's all about finding the right investor for now. And that is especially difficult at the minute, given lots of investors are moving later and later stage.
Yeah, I think they're encroaching, and you've mentioned clinical data. I think nowadays there is no institutional VC that would engage at an earlier stage before clinical data. And it feels like that space is becoming even more competitive. And I liked your analogy that there is more supply than there is a demand for such technology as well.
No, definitely. And it's about what can you prove and what investors can you find who understand the inflection points that you can reach prior to having clinical data. Because once you get to clinical data, the numbers and the data and the finances even and the adoption rates, they will speak for themselves. So what can you do before that? Well, how do I de-risk technology? How do I build a defensible moat? How do I prove product market fit in the early stage? How do I attract the right talent internationally? That's a really important part. And again, that comes down to relationships as well. How do I build the right talent internationally? to make this a success and for everyone to buy into the vision that this is as de-risked as it can be for us to execute on the plan later on. I think all of those things are things that startups who are interested in this can do prior to having clinical data.
Yeah. And obviously for investors, exit strategy is important as well, or one of the most important things in terms of making that decision. Do you see OSSTEC following more of a build to buy path or becoming a standalone platform, and what drives that decision?
Yeah. I mean, so build to buy is definitely interesting, and we've definitely had interest in that line of thought. The interesting thing about build to buy is it requires an agreement upfront and a sharing of information in both directions. So I think coming back to my point earlier, the winners in the orthopedic space will be the companies who understand how to integrate new technologies, new products in the best way. And one way to do that is to be quite open and quite flexible with what it is you want from your build to buy opportunities or from startups. Even something as simple as sharing a specification can be quite impactful and quite direct for a startup and give them a very clear direction. Of course, early partnerships on capital to help de-risk the technical stage is always of interest. But beyond that as well, people who are happy to engage early with a view to then structuring out a long-term partnership later on, it helps de-risk certain aspects of company strategy, which otherwise kind of loom large for startups.
I think that's a very nice closing remark, I would say, and I very much appreciate you sharing all of the insights with us today.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation, Dami.
Nice one. Awesome, Max.